Greetings, friends and fellow palm lovers. Let's talk about palm trees. So, before we get started, I've got a few thoughts to kind of frame the conversation. We're on the fifth revision. The latest was enacted July 1st, 2022. And over the years, I've done this presentation many times. Grades and standards has always meant to me to be a vehicle through which we elevate the industry. So from the grower's perspective, let's just grow better trees or trees and plants and palms. And as the saying goes, all ships are lifted with the rising tide, or something to that effect. Anyway, thank you, JFK. Palms are relatively simple organisms, so the document itself is not overly complex. It doesn't have a lot of steps, and so hopefully we can understand the processes involved in assigning a grade and then moving on to talking about specifications. Keep in mind that what we have here is a marketplace tool. We use this for the assessment and the valuation of palm trees. And as such, it's the instrument itself is designed to allow us to assign value. All right, palms are iconic to Florida. There's much of Florida as beaches, sunshine, themed park, mosquitoes, crowded highways, sunburns, hurricanes, all that is a part of the Florida lifestyle. So palms are an important part of Florida and what makes Florida, Florida. They're not of any particular consequence in terms of a commercial valued crop, but they are critical and an important economic driver as it relates to the quality of life and tourism. So they're very much a part of Florida, and so let's show them the proper respect and value them as they should be valued for the landscape and also for the natural setting. They offer diversity in both the man-made and the natural setting. So with that backdrop, let's talk about why we even have grades and standards, because Florida is unique in that regard. In 1955, the legislature said, top left over the picture of some palm trees in context with a lot of other trees, is the quote that says the industry must precisely communicate the attributes of its valued product. So we were given those marching orders a long time ago, and we've been working on grades and standards ever since. We do upgrades from time to time and understand that the document itself is still a work in progress. So if you can help us, we welcome any suggestions. We don't have many places to turn for models when it comes to coming up with a means for evaluating palms. And so the DPI joined hands with the industry, and it's through DPI that these standards and specifications may be enforced. So we don't really, or I don't know, where the impetus for grades and standards for Florida came from, whether it was from a garden club, if it was organically conceived, or how did it come about? It's curious to me, as I mentioned before, that nowhere else do we have a model to look at to build our grades and standards around. So we think about ANSI, but ANSI clearly backs away from the matter and says ANSI does not provide buyers with any assurance of health of the nursery stock being specified or sold. So kind of left hanging there. So we don't get much help from ANSI. So we had to do it on our own. And so for the industry and Florida has decided that they would step up and do so. So now, because we have the grades and standards, we're obliged to use them. So I got thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, you know, from the grower's perspective, I see it this way. And I started thinking about some of you other folks who are in the industry and how is it important to you? And so for a landscape architect, I talked with an old buddy, Joe Samnick, and I said, Joe, how is it that the grades and standards become an important part of a landscape plan? And Joe offered the following quote, which you see boldly printed before you there. And it comes, it just so happens that it's a critical part of your landscape plan. You darn sure better include it, or you have abandoned the concept of quality assurance. And so we'll provide you with a quote for quality assurance later on, but it's a mighty important deal in terms of fulfilling your responsibility to the ultimate user of product. And this is something I had to say, but your understanding of the grades and standards process is pretty important to you. And so with this statement, let's start looking at a few of the relatively minor adjustments that were made. I'm going to enumerate those for you before we start talking about the grades and standards document itself. There have been a few adjustments on leaf counts. They've been reduced. We addressed the issue of trunk damage and how we can evaluate trunk damage and how that applies to depression, pseudobark damage, or the eventual problems associated with vascular tissue damage or exposure. So trunk constriction's been changed or has been offered as a replacement to abrupt constriction. Root regeneration, we expanded on that a little bit, and there'll be more that takes place in the future as more research is done on that topic. That's a pretty involved notion. It's not always necessary for palm trees, but there are certain instances where if you don't have a root regenerated palm, it simply may not live on the project, or if it does, it'll struggle and do poorly for a very long time. We clarified the grading process and abbreviated it somewhat, and so we've got a pretty simple approach in that grading process. The introduction, and look at this, because we have two introductions, we have two glossaries, because we have two separate and distinct parts of the document. We've got a section that addresses the matter of grading, and then we go on to the specifying section. They are separate, not entirely disjointed, or they are interrelated, but they are in fact separate processes. So the grading is done in terms of standards that we've established for measurement, and the requirements that are contractually laid out, and specifications are in addition to but separate from the grading itself. Keep in mind that grades are established through the application of standards. Specifications are exacting contractual requirements. And it's important to make clear this distinction in your thinking about palm trees. Introducing, or the introduction to palms and grading, what we tried to do was, as the committee, we tried to address the issues of who, what, when, where, and why. The who part of that is the receiving entity or person who signs off on the invoice when it arrives at the job, or the holding facility, or wherever it might be delivered. So that's the point and time when the grading must take place, because thereafter, well, we kind of let the ship sail if we didn't do it at that point. The when, as when it's delivered, obviously we're talking about palm trees, so that's the what part. Where, we talked about job sites or holding facilities or wherever they might be delivered. And the why, well, we just talked about the why, is because there was a void in terms of guidance for how we value our product, or what mechanism we use to establish the value of our product. The committee members, when I was asked to chair this committee, I said, okay, well, I bring a perspective, but we need perspectives from a number of from all of the segments that are critical in the green industry. So we talked, we got together inspectors and landscape architects and contractors and growers and brokers and DPI, and for good measure, we threw in a professor from the Fort Lauderdale University of Florida Palm Extension facility. And so we brought together this group so that the committee itself would not be loaded with individuals that might bring with them a bias perspective on the matter. So that's the way we went about filling the chairs at the committee. The assignment of the grade, as I said, it's a prescriptive process based on statutory standards. And this is all, by the way, statutory stuff. So it's in Florida's, someplace in the halls of Florida legislature up there, and they've got it as a part of the body of the Florida statutes. Takes place at time of delivery. Our mission as a committee was to try to create a mechanism for a clear, objective, quantifiable process. And it's, as I said, it's created as a marketplace tool. And the earlier version that we had was this is before we started again shortly after 2010, was a bit ambiguous, really didn't have discrete, objective definitions for valuation. So we were trying to find an objective and quantifiable process. And so that's the reason that in establishing these standards, we also tried to tie with them measurements that could be applied that are discrete and can be quantified. And so that was the objective, just have something that provide measurements. Again, specs are beyond, but have to be in compliance with the grade that's established, or the grade that we're using. We've got two glossaries, one for grading, one for specified. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because we simply don't have time to go through this whole thing blow by blow. Chlorosis, a concept that most of you are familiar with. Usually it has something to do with a nutritional problem, can be other issues, but it's a critical part of the grading process because it's what's going on in the leaf of the tree, or the leaf of the palm. Clustering palms are a little different than the other multi-trunk palms that are ordinarily grown as single pieces. So we've got we've got to treat them a little differently, and we'll get into that later on. A container grown palm, or what that means exactly is that the entire palm has to be, or the entire root system has to be contained and cannot be growing out, because it's no longer container palm if it's growing out the water holes in the bottom of the container. So it has an advantage, or the potential for getting out of bounds. We don't have a size requirement. That's something that you can address if you choose to in these specifications. If you've got a certain size of palm that you want to be accompanied with a 45 or 65 gallon container, you're perfectly within your rights to establish that you want this size container for the palm that you lay out in the rest of your specs. Cull, we decided, well, cull's really not a grade, and you'll kind of begin to understand a little bit better why we don't think that cull is necessary. It's a potato thing. If you want to call cull a grade, that's fine. No skin off my nose, but the cull is something that usually takes place pretty much immediately upon inspection of the tree. So it's not really a part of that reduction through a series of defects that might be found with the tree. Depression, that's a big deal, and we did expand our def in a little bit on depression here, and again in the eliminating factors before we start talking about the actual grading of the palm. Depressions, you can see in that top right frame there, you can see an improperly supported royal palm. And royal palm, it's a crown shaft species. They usually have somewhat thinner pseudobark, so the protection isn't there, and the darn thing needs to be protected properly or cushioned properly. You see the consequence of improper support right below that picture of the royal palm that's on the rack. Excuse me. All right, excellent leaf. Excellent leaf is a very good leaf in all regards. Little damage, no chlorosis, on and on, no physical damage. It doesn't say it's perfect. It says it's excellent, but that is a very high standard indeed. Extreme succulents, that caused the committee a little bit of heartburn because we couldn't entirely quantify the concept, or this eliminating factor as it did. It became an eliminating factor. We did the best that we could to provide you with a pretty solid definition that would allow you to say that, okay, that's an extreme succulents case that we're dealing with here, and we're not going to accept that tree. Field grown palms, self-explanatory. Good leaf is a leaf that's not an excellent leaf, but it's a darn sure a good one. And so it's an important part of the evaluation of the grading process. Grade, that's a well, you know what a grade is. That's why we're here. We're talking about grades. And we're also going to talk about how you get to a grade. Juvenile palm is something that we've kind of kicked down the can that's been kicked down the road for a while. We don't really define, maybe we should define juvenile palms, but juvenile palms are not usually a part of the palm trees that we evaluate that are showing up for jobs. So it's been given less attention than the other standards or criteria that we use. Let's see, I guess that does that for this page. All right, let's, the second page, the glossary. Leaf count, a critical part of the grading process. increased leaf quality and count. The leaves are the where photosynthesis takes place, of course, and you can see in that picture top left there the leaf count on that tree as we look up the trunk through the canopy. The leaf count, we try to keep that proportional to the amount of the root ball measurement, the amount of soil that we can take with the tree. So the leaf count needs to be in check, but it has to be great enough to validate that the tree is healthy and also assist in the reestablishment of that tree over time. Necrosis, really necrosis is just an aesthetic concern. Probably should have been cut off before the palm was delivered, but it doesn't reduce a grade because it has a necrotic leaf in the canopy. It just can't be counted as part of the evaluation process to establish a grade. Overall height, we assign overall height numbers to species, and then from that we determine how the root ball is to be measured. So the overall height of the tree plays into that table that we use for determining root ball measurement, and that's table 1. We only have one table. Primary trunk, this term is used to establish a grade for multi-trunk and clustering palms. Both are treated the same here. Pseudobark, and we've got a picture of that one too. So look at that, and you can see on this tree we've got a very thin layer of pseudobark, and then within that is the vascular tissue, the xylem and phloem, carrying part of the tree or of the palm. Pseudobark is important stuff that, if it's exposed or damaged, we can have the invasion of diseases or insects that might create damage to the palm. Hump scars or pup scars, and that's something that took place a very long time ago. So the potential for invasion is in the distant past, and that's of course something that we see on some of the dactyliferas, the phoenix species in particular. Regenerated palm, there's more to be done here on regenerated palms. We've just got a lot of work to do there. So many darn variables associated with, first of all, which palms even need to be regenerated. Certainly we know that Bismarcks and Sables require some type of root pruning or root regeneration in order to relocate them successfully. Regrades are the means through which disputes are settled. Root ball measurement, note this is it's a different concept from root ball size. So root ball measurement, we arrive at that a little differently. Tipped leaf, you can't grade that which you cannot see. So this has to take place after the delivery of the tree. We had some issues early on because people were tipping leaves before the leaves or before the palms were graded. And you just can't do that because it removes enough of that leaf so it falls below the 10% mark. It is a valued procedure for many people use it with royals and coconuts, and it has validity because it reduces transpiration. It also reduces stress on the bud. So the tipped leaf can be a good thing. It just can't be done before you establish a grade. Vascular tissue, we talked about vascular tissue and pseudobark a minute ago. Vertical fissures, well, you know what vertical is, you know what a fissure is. So vertical fissures are okay. They're kind of a natural part of many of the trees. But if they're too extreme, there is the potential for disease or insect invasion. All right, here are the grades, and you notice cull is not there. And the definition of grade is pretty simple. It just seems, in each case, it says it meets the requirement necessary to achieve this grade. So don't know how much simpler that could be. These are clearly stated definitions. Gosh, they're so much simpler than for hardwood trees. And grading palms, usually the grading of palms is very different from the grading of trees. With palm trees, we kind of turn the process upside down. We start off with a number of eliminating factors, and then from that point, we establish a grade by going to the table. So we don't have to do a deduction of this or that, or we don't, you know, palms are almost the entire, all of palms, except for a very few exceptions, are single stem. They have no branches, so there's no included bark. Their root systems are simple. So what we have to look at to grade a palm tree is not nearly as involved as it is with a hardwood type tree. And the eliminating factors begin the process. And then, as I said, when we go to table 1, we are going to assign a grade based on the leaf count. And that's really, leaf count is the only thing that differentiates between a Florida Fancy and a Florida number 2. All right, this talks about the steps for determining a grade, and I got a little bit ahead of myself there because it shows us here, spells out all of those eliminating factors that we have to look at. There are a number of diseases that are a problem. Wood-boring insects, the depression thing, we talked about that. You can't have depressions because they're going to present a potential for the failure of that palm tree. Pesticide injection sites and pup scars from clonally produced trees, they don't count. That's accepted as not an eliminating factor. The vertical fissures greater than an inch, that's an eliminating factor. Extreme succulents, when we were going through that glossary, we talked about the problems associated with extreme succulents, and then apparently a repeat of the vertical fissures there. So go through all of those eliminating factors, and you don't find anything there. So now we're going to move on to table 1, and table 1 then allows us to evaluate the palm after we've said it's doesn't have any issues with any of these eliminating factors. Now we're going to determine what the grade of that palm might be. So each of the palm species in table 1, and they're like 2,700 species of palms. So what we did, in a very bold way, we assigned leaf counts based on our collective understanding and knowledge about each palm tree that was being considered. We said, okay, this is an acceptable leaf count, and we're going to have this number for a fancy, this number a 1, and this a number 2. And if it falls below the number 2, then it's a cull, because the leaves are such an important measure of the health of a palm tree that we have kind of hung our hat on that and said, look, the quality and number of leaves that the palm tree has is a direct reflection of the health of that palm at any point in time. So we've got the one exception to that we've drawn out, and we've said, okay, we're going to require that some of the cabbage palms are going to be regenerated. Either they're going to be regenerated or they're going to be cropped, which used to be hurricane cut. So if you've got a species that's outside of this, and let me talk a little bit more about that. The first paragraph don't have any issues with that. That kind of tells you how we go about this. The second paragraph is pretty much okay, but it basically says only eliminating factors apply to unnamed species. So if we've got something like, we shipped out some Livistona species recently that wasn't on this list, and so we kind of had to make things up. So my advice to you, if you're going to specify a palm that's not on this list, look at something that's very similar to that tree in terms of its physiology, and say, okay, it's kind of like this tree, so I'm going to say that we have a like number of leaves for a Florida fancy, and we're going to also have a root ball measurement that's comparable to whatever tree X might be. So we've got an idea of how we're going to go about this, but it's going to be up to you, because this has to be created in your specifications section. Something else that's kind of woven into this is that the grading process for a multi-trunk palm is based on, or the grade is based on the tallest and all of the other stems or trunks that are 3/4 of the clear trunk height of the main stem or the main trunk. So if any one of those, let's say you've got five stems in your tree or your palm tree, and 4 of them are Florida fancy, but 1 is a Florida number 1. So that means that the group is now a Florida 1, because it becomes the grade that is the lowest grade of any part of the whole. A lot of palm trees that are grown as multiple trunks that ordinarily are single trunk are crowded too tightly together. And so be careful about that, because you can often have a group of trees, a multi-trunk that would ordinarily be a single trunk tree, and they're putting a squeeze on one of the other palms that's in that group. Well, over time, that one's going to lose out. It's going to become less and less prominent. It just, in effect, gets crowded out, and it becomes a problem. So when you talk to your supplier, if you're a landscape architect, you're talking to a contractor maybe, or you're talking directly with the grower, know what you're looking at there, because there is an inherent problem associated with the crowding of these palms too tightly together. All right, here's the second. What do we got here? The second page of our table 1, and this includes another group of palms. Now, excuse me, this is kind of buried in the document. So we have a PDF on our website under the education section. You can pull this up, because I can't remember all of these different numbers that are associated with each tree. It's not to say that there wasn't a great deal of thought that went into assigning these numbers. I just can't commit them all to memory, and unless you're a heck of a lot better at that sort of thing than I am, you can't either. So get your cheat sheet out and make life easier by simply going and finding these numbers that are associated with each species for the leaf count and for the root ball measurement. You know, this part of the process. And how are we doing on time? Do we have any idea we're all right?
Yep, you're good. About 30 minutes in.
Oh, okay, good deal. Only 30.
Yeah.
That's amazing. All right. Well, I'm talking a lot faster than is comfortable for me. The part of this that bothers me is that when we evaluate a palm, we start off with a fancy, and we require that fancy to have only excellent leaves. And then we go from fancy to number 1, and there's not only a reduction in the number of leaves, there's a reduction in the quality of leaves. So when you're specifying a palm tree, if you really want the best of the best, and by a considerable margin, the best of the best, specify a Florida fancy, because a Florida number 1, you know, when they were trimming the leaves off of that tree to give you the remaining number necessary to meet grade, they probably trimmed off a lot of leaves that were really not great leaves. And so in doing so, the evidence of nutritional deficiencies or other problems has been removed. So you've got a significantly less healthy palm to begin with, that lacks the stored energy in the leaves and in the system of the tree, that's going to allow that palm tree to reestablish more quickly on the job site. So that's just I told you at the outset that I bring to this the bias of a grower, and a grower who thinks things should be done properly. And so that's one man's position on the matter. All right, this is the way it's simple, folks. The summary is, we don't have any eliminating factors, so we're looking at leaf count, leaf quality, and root ball measurement. Couldn't be much simpler than that. Still a reasonably simple process, but if you understand this process, it'll make your life easier and perhaps keep you out of court and get you better palm trees for your jobs. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the common diseases, and they're almost always lethal diseases, in some cases inevitably so. Once it gets this problem in its system, the deal is done. So let's talk about some of these eliminating factors that are diseases, and offer a word of caution here. Don't try to be a consultant. You're probably not a pathologist, so don't try to be a pathologist. If you sense that there is a problem, don't go off into areas that you're not qualified to offer an expert opinion on. Sound the alarm, step aside, call in the expert, and recognize that, particularly when something's put in writing, you can be on the hook for the matter. So don't hang yourself out to dry in this regard. I'm a grower. We've pretty well established that at this point. So in growing trees, I can recognize that there's a problem there, but getting to the root of the problem is not always the easy part, because I am not a pathologist, I'm not a soil scientist, I'm not a chemist, hydrologist, or a lot of the things that I call upon experts to provide their understanding of specific problems. So stay in your lane, put nothing in writing that you're not absolutely sure about, and maybe just don't put anything in writing when it comes to assessments of what problems you might be dealing with in the landscape and with the tree being evaluated. Just don't do it. It's not a smart thing for you to get involved in. All right, let's talk about some of these diseases. And as I said, they're almost always done deal. If a palm tree has fusarium, there's no known way to correct that problem. The Fusarium oxysporum canariensis is largely isolated. The two species that it's shown up in are canariensis and reclinata. No known cure. The good news, if it is good news, and is that it can be avoided by using clean pruning tools. That's the way it gets transmitted, or it's believed that it's transmitted with contaminated tools. Your observation of the reduction in quality of the leaves is what you're going to be focused on here. You're not going to have to diagnose whether or not it's one disease or another. You're just seeing that there is something going on, that something is askew here, my friends. So let's not try to diagnose the problem. Let's call in an expert, send a sample off to the lab and have it analyzed and find out specifically what the problem is. By the way, these slides, this part of the PowerPoint this is not in the document, is
Correct.
it?
No, it is not.
So you're gonna have to go either to our website, where we'll have a PDF on this under education, or I guess it would be in DPI of University of Florida. So this is where you're going to find the information that you need about all of these disease problems that we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. So we've got canariensis, one form of fusarium, and now we've got palmarum, and many of the symptoms are similar. The hosts seem to vary quite a bit. The palmarum, however, can move around a lot more easily. It can be transmitted mechanically through the air or water or soil. So it gets around a lot more freely than the canariensis. I saw this problem starting to show up, oh golly, 2002, 2003, maybe in the lower East Coast. And I saw Washingtonians dying by the hundred, and particularly along the turnpike, which I was traveling down to the Keys. And so I got my attention. I called a buddy. I said, okay, what's going on? He said, Fusarium palmarum. And I said, well, what the heck? Can it be fixed? And no, apparently there is not a fungicide that's out there that will reverse this problem or prohibit the contraction of the problem in the first place, I'm guessing. And so not long after that, we exited the Washingtonian and Queen market and started growing a lot more Livistona species. Livistonas are pretty disease resistant. The palms are kind of under assault in Florida, so you got to pick and choose. You got to be careful. The people who are doing the maintenance can't be careless. We can't be careless in the handling. We're going to talk about some of the handling issues that we face in just a couple of minutes. LY, that's a phytoplasm problem. Can't be fixed after, or we believe that it can't be fixed after the palm contracts the disease. Can be prevented, however, with the application of either systemic insecticide or antibiotics. There are two different ways that this can happen. We have our own preferred approach that we use and recommend that kills the pathogen itself. The pathogen is moved around by a little bug called Haplaxus crudus. It used to be Midas crudus, but you know, taxonomists being taxonomists, they have to change names on things from time to time for no apparent reason to me, but they've got their reason. So Ganoderma is another irreversible, at least at this point, irreversible, terminal, lethal disease problem that palm trees get. Basically, all palm trees get it. We once thought that it was entirely associated with the areas of the palm where you find lignified tissue. Dr. Bram Dillon over in Fort Lauderdale has told us it's more about cellulose, or at least cellulose in addition to lignin. And he's using a thing called, or a process, sonic tomography. Those of you who are arborists may be familiar with the instrument and the concept. So this is being used to test to see if the palm tree has parts of the trunk that are of a different consistency. It's kind of a sound wave thing where you're sending a signal, bouncing it off, and if you get different density levels of the vascular tissue, it shows up on an instrument. I've never used one of them, but I'm looking forward to using one of them. Eventually, they get conks. The digression is rather slow usually because it plugs up the vascular system of the tree, and so the transport mechanism is compromised, and over time, the tree eventually just dies out. Phalaenopsis, now I was talking about how we mishandle trees a couple of minutes ago. Often observed in the upper third of the tree, lower leaves that so you just need to know these symptoms. You don't need to know all of this other stuff. You're not a pathologist, but you are capable of making observations. It's a relatively weak fungus that frequently gets all the help that it needs for the invasion of the palm from humans through our careless behavior. It does occur naturally, but very rarely so. Sometimes it just happens out of the blue, but it more often takes place when a number of variables converge, and those variables are exposed vascular tissue and the presence of the pathogen. We've got another PDF on our website under the education section. And a buddy of ours, Russell Adams, sent to us a PowerPoint that Robert Lay and Robbie Robinson from DPI put together on what they call the sable palm decline. It's and this PowerPoint, look at it, it's disturbing. The number of sables, the number of cabbage palms that are being lost because of the Laeviopsis. And it happens because we're careless. Think about this. You've got one of these trees that's died from this problem. One of these palm trees died because of the Laeviopsis. Okay, the crew shows up with another tree to put in its place. They pull the tree out of the ground that just died, and with the same tree strap, they go over and lift the tree off of the truck that they're going to replace that tree with. Well, that tree strap can very easily, and in many cases, carries the pathogen from dead or dying tree to new host, and we've infected that tree before it ever even goes into the ground. So cleanliness is next to godliness, but in this case, it's necessary, for crying out loud. Don't be sloppy. And if you see this sort of thing taking place, again, don't step in or try to be the expert in the matter, but say, you know, I once heard this fellow who told the story about, and so you can maybe intervene and have people just essentially clean up their act. And that incidentally is the only one of these disease problems that doesn't show a decline in the canopy right away. It may disguise its presence for a long, long time. And the reason I mention that is because we're talking about leaf health and leaf quality frequently. And all of these other disease problems that we've been talking about, there's usually a decline in the, you can visually observe that there's something going on. The Laeviopsis may not, you may not know until the top falls out of the darn thing. So a little different animal there. Phytophthora bud rot is the only one of these problems that I know of that can be dealt with if it's detected early on. A bud drench will correct the problem, but it has to be addressed very early on in the progression of this disease. And usually in the landscape, by the time it's detected, the ship has sailed in the matter. So it's a done deal at that point. Lethal bronzing, like lethal yellowing, is a phytoplasm, and it's characterized by premature fruit drop. The inflorescence becomes necrotic, and the discoloration of the older leaves, just talked about that, progressing to younger leaves, and a collapse of the leaf sphere. One thing that's not mentioned here is that when that tree is taken out, same thing with, well, no, it's not with LY, but it is with LBD, lethal bronzing. the roots of the palm rot right away. So when that tree is taken out, if there is a compromised root system, it very likely could be LBD. Can be prevented, but has to be addressed proactively. Now, the LBD problem is prevalent throughout the state. There are protocols in place that can prevent the problem. No known protocol to retrieve the palm after it contracts the disease. So you got to do it proactively. And on our website, again, we have a good deal of information about how to properly inoculate a tree that is susceptible to LBD to keep that from ever happening in the first place. And you see in these pictures what I was talking about, the reduction in the canopy of the tree, the browning of the lower leaves, the spear falls out. That's just a couple of the symptoms that we're looking at. All right, we'll be moving on to palm specifying next. Let's take a break.